what all this is about. If you're wondering what all this is about, he's putting this on YouTube live. So won't be showing you in it, so don't get worried. You want to be a closet Buddhist. That's 4 minutes. Okay. So you can just sit and do some deep, slow breathing and center your awareness. A few minutes first. Okay, friends. So yesterday I've been mentioning about samsara and being the description of the mind continually wandering around in circles, seeking experiences. And that pertains to the idea of the external rebirth of these bodies, undergoing the mind seeking out, creating different bodies for it to exist in order to work out its karma. But that is simply an external manifestation and a continuation of the internal process that is going on in our mind moment by moment. And especially in terms of creating karma. And karma is really the fuel for perpetuating the individual existence, and also whether that existence is going to be one fraught with a lot of problems and suffering, or one that's going to be less so. And that's all detailed in the 12 links of the Tica Samuppada, the pendant origination, that we also mentioned last night in the recitation. But there's 4 aspects out of those 12 links of dependent origination, or 3 specifically are called the karma process, and that are specifically important for a person to understand, for understanding their mind and how it's caught up into so many kinds of habits, even the habits of thinking, and habits of emotion, and habits of liking and disliking, that so many people, it's hard to get out of, hard to decondition. So it's really that those 3 or 4 stages are the most, where the whole Dhamma, the practice of Dhamma, is centered around learning how to abandon the unwholesome thoughts, speech, and actions that bring suffering results, and to create new wholesome ones that bring more comfort, ease, well-being, happiness, and eventually liberation. And also these are tied in with the 3 stages of practice that we see in the Noble Eightfold Path. So as I think you all know, the Noble Eightfold Path is divided into 3 main groups, called the skillful conduct, mental composure, and wisdom, or more popularly called morality, concentration, and wisdom, because the word morality is sometimes has not such a good connotation or so on. The skillful conduct is actually more appropriate term when used in the Buddhist context of training the mind in the precepts of skillful conduct and calming the mind. Even concentration is a kind of a misnomer, because concentration also has some misconceptions to it, but means calming the mind, tranquilizing the mind, and then wisdom. So these 3 groups of the Eightfold Path are directly tied in with these 3 parts of the Paticca Samuppada, 3 stages that I'm going to try to explain. I've already mentioned them to a certain degree, or in some other talks. So basically, if you recall the dependent origination, these stages dependent on contact, we were talking about that last night in some question. Depending on contact arises feeling. And dependent on feeling arises craving. Dependent on craving arises clinging or grasping. Dependent on grasping arises becoming. And becoming, dependent on becoming arises birth, and then suffering and all the rest of it. But these three of craving, grasping, and becoming, those are the ones that correlate directly to the practices of the skillful conduct, mental composure, and wisdom, or sila, samadhi, and panya, to use the common Pali terms. So, and in the second noble truth, actually, in the Buddhist teaching, the second noble truth is usually stated as craving is the origin or the cause of suffering. How many have heard that? So, and a lot of people, when they read the Buddhist teachings, they, a lot of times they would say, oh, you have to get rid of craving, you have to get rid of craving, craving an evil thing. But when people hear that, craving basically equals sort of desire. And when people hear that, we have to give up all desires. They say, wow, how can I do that? They get discouraged. That to be a Buddhist, I have to give up all desires. So hopefully in the course of this explanation, that will become a little bit more clear. So anyway, we talked about already, depending on, we have this body and it's got 6 senses on it, right? It's got the 5 physical senses, and then the mind is the 6th one. The object of the mind are our thoughts, imagination, memories, and so on. And basically it works just like a sense work. But these senses, and they're always being stimulated, unless you're sleeping or otherwise incapacitated. And depending on those contacts, feelings arise. We've already discussed this. That means the pleasant, painful, and neutral feelings that arise from those sensory contacts. And these are feelings that we continually react to. So, the mind has already divided everything into either things it likes, things it doesn't like, or things it kind of just ignores because they don't really stimulate the mind. Like neutral feelings are very sort of obscure. They're kind of like background noise. You hardly even notice them. Like just the traffic noise, you get so used to it that, it's just a neutral feeling. It doesn't cause any anger or desire. So, but the ones that we get caught in, the ones that our life revolves around, and that we create most of the karma, are the painful sensations and the pleasant sensations. Wanting to get the pleasant sensations or hold on to the ones that we have gotten, not wanting them to go away, or trying to push away from painful sensations that have arisen and trying to keep them from arising in the future by planning, scheming, conniving how you're going to avoid this or that person coming to visit you, or getting into some other, anticipating some pain. Oh, Bhantaji, Buddha says we got to meditate for 2 hours because I got a bellyache, you know. So the mind will always be coming up with a lot of, is always trying to protect itself and coming up with all kinds of disguises and smoke screens and other good sounding excuses why it doesn't want to, the fear of the painful feelings and how it can get its anticipated pleasurable feelings. So anyway, so dependent on the feeling arises craving. Now this is the first real kind of activity of the mind. Feeling is kind of an automatic response because it's been conditioned from the past, how we reacted to things in the past. And so they're automatic. You can't really do much about the feeling arising. And that's why the Vedanusati, mindfulness of feelings, is an important, is the second factor of the Satipatthana, of the mindfulness practice. First, getting grounded, centered in the body, and then observing these feelings. Because it's depending on the feeling arises either craving to want the feeling or desire or craving to get away from the feeling. And this is something you can directly observe when we're meditating, especially with painful body sensation. It's probably the most prominent. You can see that kind of wincing, you get a sharp pain somewhere and you kind of feel this kind of nervous system tightening up. And then the mind, so that the craving is that a first initial kind of desire to do something. And usually by itself, it's kind of weak. It's just the initial desire. Now, this is where mindfulness plays its most important role, is that is something we can be aware of. And especially that mindfulness of intention that I was trying to get you to pay more attention to this morning in the movement practice. Being able to see that intention to move any part of the body. In the same way, when these feelings come up, you can see this intention, especially with the painful feelings. Pleasure ones are a little bit more subtle or not so direct, but the painful ones are, like hit you right in the face. That feel an itch, maybe a loud sound. Someone starts banging on something and trying to meditate, you can feel this contraction of the nervous system. So that, and then you see some initial desire to wish it stopped. Now, if we have good mindfulness and we can just note it, desire, or pain, and we've developed enough concentration where we can just kind of detach from it, or just be aware of thinking, and that's enough to cause the thought to drop away. Then that desire or aversion doesn't go anyplace. It doesn't really do much by itself. But if our mindfulness is slow, then that desire morphs into grasping. And grasping is the continued focus on that object with the intention to want to do something to get it or have it or increase it or to get away from it, which involves thinking. So the craving itself doesn't involve too much thinking. It's kind of just the initial kind of urge to getting attracted to something or pulling away from something. or it could involve some initial thoughts. But if you check it close enough, if you check it fast enough with mindfulness and applying the appropriate antidotes, then they fall away, they disappear from the mind in that moment. But as I said, if you're a little bit slow, then it morphs into more thinking about it. Scheming, planning, how am I going to get away from this? And that's called the grasping, clinging to this idea. I have to have that. My life depends on it. I can't live without that. Or the opposite, to get away from something. And so that grasping process can actually be quite long. You could go on for several minutes or even longer, really grasping this idea. I have to do that. Or that person said this to me, and they're wrong, and that is, really grasping that idea. This person did something to you or didn't do something for you. So grasping kind of is longer. So we have a second chance to abandon that grasping by applying more of the same mindfulness and clear comprehension and investigation. Now, if that grasping goes unchecked, grasping eventually comes to a point where there's a decision to be made. What am I going to do about this? Let's just give some simple example. Let's say you're meditating a hot day, your throat's parched, and the desire, I wish I'd have a cool drink. Even if you're not meditating, it could be outside working, desire, I'd have a cool drink. And you could say, well, that's not the right time. I'll take a break in the next hour. But if you can't resist it and you go on thinking, yes, I have to have that drink, and maybe, Bhante really won't see me if I leave for 5 minutes, go drink a cold Dr. Pepper or something. So you make a decision. Yes, I'm going to do that. And you do it either to get the object of the desire or to get away from, like maybe you're getting too hot or the unpleasant feeling of pain, stop what you're doing. So tell your boss a little lie, or you're going to stop and take a break or something like that. So anyway, it basically is decision. You make a decision, and then you do the action. And that's called the becoming. So the actual action that you take based on the grasping is the becoming. It's called bhava. And there's some different meanings of the word becoming. Becoming, of course, is the English translation of bhava. And with the Pali, that's why there's no English word to really clearly illustrate some of the Pali words. So that's why sometimes it's this, like feeling, for example. But anyway, so the becoming is the karma. You created the karma. You actually done a conscious action. Like break one of the precepts or something else. It doesn't have to be breaking a precept, but any of those like examples I just mentioned. So, and once you complete the action, it's called becoming because the habit becomes stronger, basically. Because every time you repeat the habit, it becomes stronger. And why does it become stronger? Because the electromagnetic neurons and other things that are going on in the brain and nervous system, that's how they operate. The more you do a certain action, it creates neural pathways. You've all heard about that, right? And those neural pathways are nothing but the effects of karma and repetition of doing. Maybe I shouldn't say, if any brain scientists are here, they might say, it's not right. But I'm not a brain scientist. But anyway, the neural pathways. And so they get strengthened by repetition. And they weaken when you stop repeating them. Gradually, they will sort of atrophy if you stop repeating certain actions long enough. Then those pathways will kind of go defunct, and a person can create new neural pathways. I mean, that's happening all the time in the brain. But that's actually where the becoming takes place. It's simply the way the brain and physiology and everything is set up. These are just electrical circuits, basically, the way that we think, the way that we react. So the becoming is really like the karma. And then that strengthens the habits and the sankharas. So the most important part of that whole process, craving, grasping, and becoming, that's where we practice the Dhamma. Whether it's in your daily life, if you're observing precepts, you try to not to break that precept, and so you're trying to prevent the becoming. Actually, I'm going to be talking about that. But in actual experience, in the mind, it evolves as first there's the craving, then there's the grasping, and there's the becoming. And you have three opportunities actually two main ones to break that cycle. So whenever you create the becoming, that also goes back and strengthens the craving or the aversion, because it's like, I won, I got it, got the object of my desire, or I got rid of that. Oh, it worked next time too. So next time the same kind of similar experience comes again automatically, because of these neurons, the habit and the thoughts and so on will automatically come up. Is that you're not doing it. Neurons are doing it. That's very important to understand. That's why one of the main foundations of the Buddhist teaching is no self. There's no self that's doing it. It's simply habits. And that's why it's so difficult to change the habits, because people don't understand the mechanics of the process that's involved. They think it's just the ego that's doing all these things out of sheer force and manipulation. And that's why it rarely works that way, actually. Sometimes it does, but a lot of times it doesn't. So the Buddha devised a new system and a new way of dealing with it. So anyway, so what I'm getting at is, don't worry too much about craving. Too much is a big deal about craving. Worry about grasping and becoming. Because craving itself doesn't create any karma. It's just an innocent little thought. I wish I had ice cream. Well, of course, there could be other serious stuff, but if you have the mindfulness and check it, it won't go anywhere. It'll just vanish. So that's the first defense when we're actually meditating. The process starts with the craving, and so you first, where the feeling comes first, you can observe the feeling, but really feeling and craving are going to come up almost simultaneously. So this idea of observing the feeling is, yeah, you can observe the feeling, but what you're doing is you're restraining the craving and trying to develop equanimity, but yet the craving, that urge will still be there, but at least that separation from the feeling, the craving won't generate too much. So, but anyway, so you become aware of the feeling, but immediately then to see the urge, the intention arise. But as I already mentioned, if your mindfulness and wisdom isn't strong enough, then that morphs into grasping. So then you contemplate the grasping in the various ways that the Buddha talked about, the removal of distracting thoughts, Vitakana Santana Sutta, and other methods. And if that doesn't work, then again you have all the way up to the point of the actual becoming to make the right decision. Now, how the practice of the Dhamma, so in our actual experience in meditation, it unfolds as feeling, craving, grasping, becoming. And then there is another one that's interesting too, birth. But I'm going to give a whole talk on this in a couple of weeks and some other programs. But just to mention it. So becoming is a karmic action. Depending on becoming arises birth. What is that? You're already born. What here is the body? How can that pertain to moment to how? How can it be born from moment to moment? Because the ego is born again. See, the ego, the sense of I, is not a static, continuous thing in your brain or a static, continuous thought. It's arising and vanishing with each moment of consciousness. And so it has a continuity because we don't see that arising and vanishing of consciousness, the space between conscious moments. And the sense of I appears to be something real. But with each moment of becoming, each time you satisfy your craving or desire, it's the I that says, I want. And so it'll be stronger in the next moment. That's the meaning, it'll come up again. So that's one meaning of the idea about birth, in using the moment-to-moment explanation of the process. And so the ego gets stronger, the ego is born again, and the habit will be born again, as I already mentioned. So that's the way that you can understand this idea of birth in the moment-to-moment mental process. Okay, now correlating that to the three groups of the Eightfold Path, Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. So as you know, Sila is on the layperson's level, the observance of the 8 precepts. When you want to retreat, you took 8 precepts, 5 precepts, 8 precepts, 10 precepts. Whatever kind of discipline you're following. And that actually, Sila helps to prevent becoming. Even though becoming is the last of the process, in our practice of the Dhamma, the Sila usually comes first. Because it's easier to practice Sila than Samadhi. And without Sila, you won't gain Samadhi. So the sila actually helps you prevent or slow down becoming. That means the accumulation of more kama. Because you've taken precepts, right? Now, a person who doesn't take any precepts or doesn't have any discipline, then whatever urge comes to them, they have no way to really kind of control it. They just act upon it spontaneously. Pull out a gun and shoot somebody, or all the other types of actions. But when you take precepts and you keep reminding yourself every day, about how you want to live your life, it eventually gets quite ingrained in your mind. And when the urge to come up to break a precept will come there, you say, no, I'm not going to transgress this. Even though you might like to, but at least the precept stops you from physically committing breaking the precept, like lying, cheating, stealing, and so on. And that will then also stop the potential of suffering that could have come back to you had you committed that or done that action. So the practice of sila directly affects the becoming. That means it reduces the accumulation, especially of negative karma. And it therefore it also weakens those habits. But the thoughts in the mind will still remain. And the thoughts are where the grasping arises. Because most of your thinking is grasping oriented thinking. So the samadhi or the meditation, we call sila samadhi panya. So the samadhi group comprises mindfulness and concentration and the right effort too. But let's just call it meditation for simplicity. So the meditation helps to weaken your thoughts, right? So we have our meditation subject, the breathing, the body. So most of our practice is about recognizing thought, trying to let it go, or substituting a negative thought for a wholesome thought, or thinking about the dangerous consequences of repeating all these negative habits. So there's a lot of little thinking, discursive thinking that goes along with certain types of meditation as well, these reflections and so on. But it's called constructive and positive thinking. Most of our thoughts are just wild, kind of disjointed, kind of unproductive thoughts. But anyway, so when you finally get progress in concentration, your thoughts subside. And so the last thing that will probably come into your mind when you're in a deep state of meditation, and the mind is really, really tranquil, and you're kind of just really grounded in the present moment and just, completely content. The last thing would come into your mind is to want to go tell a lie or something, right? Or go stomp on a cockroach. Or, even go have sex. Because in that state of samadhi, that surpasses all of those things. So that's why I'm saying the samadhi works on the grasping. That means it stills the neurotic thinking, or just stills the various thinking about, sense desires, And then, so the samadhi directly affects the the grasping. And then the panya, the wisdom, is what affects the craving. A lot of people say, how does the wisdom affect the craving? Well, there's three levels of wisdom. The initial intellectual wisdom that we get when we read some Dhamma books, hear some lectures. Then you get some initial interest. It interests you to check it out and start practicing at some point. And then when you start practicing, start observing how the law of karma is working in your mind and in your life around, seeing how greed, hatred, and delusion have such strong grips on people. Your understanding of Dhamma becomes more deeper. That's called reflective wisdom. Until eventually, at some point, you will get those very powerful, life-changing insights that result in actually destroying, weakening and destroying the roots of craving, especially in the higher paths and fruits. Once you turn, never returning stages. So that's how it's the wisdom that affects the craving. So you can't really do too much about craving in the beginning. And that's why the sila, samadhi, and panya are usually described in that way, because sila is the easier thing to do. The body is easier to control than the mind. Anybody argue that point? I'm going to give you an example. So let's say a mosquito is biting you. You see that, that pain, and you see that painful feeling, that kind of reaction. You'd be thinking, should I get rid of it or not? If you've already been meditating for a while and have some understanding, I'll tolerate. So you go on, it keeps drilling. It's worse. The whole time the mind is grasping. Should I do it? Should I not? Going back and forth. And then finally you say, he's never going to stop, and you see that hand lifting up, that intention to lift a hand, and the hand comes up like this, and the last minute, you force the hand down. So at least you prevented the becoming. But the desire to do it is still in the mind. And I just gave that example because that's an example of how it's easier to control the body than the mind. So we can control the body, we can wire our mouth shut if we, eat too much food, or we can do all kinds of things, to prevent us, lock ourselves in a room so we don't go out to some bar or something, whatever. So it's easier to control the body than to control the desires in the mind. But it's the desires in the mind that is, the fuel for doing things with the body. So and then it's only with the attainment of entering the stream and the as I already mentioned, the once returning never. This is where the roots of the ego and the roots of craving are sort of destroyed or overcome, really uprooted. But that's the hardest thing to work on. So that's why we work on first the becoming, to check our actual physical actions where we cause most of the overt suffering. And then we work on our thoughts, because as you practice the sila, then much of the grasping things will also naturally get weakened. And the obsession for a lot of those things you might have done, get weakened and weakened, so that, they're not so strongly to overcome. And then with each of those, your meditation gets better. When you practice sila, you don't have the guilt, worry, remorse, and fear from having stole things, told lies, sleep with somebody else's partner, or kill something, or intoxicated your mind and go out and kill a person in a traffic accident. They're coming to look for you. So most of the hindrances, the restlessness and worry, is because of having done things we shouldn't have done, or not have done things we should have done. So most of the hindrances arise from those. So the precepts works on at that level. And then, because of your ability to develop better concentration, you'll be able to quell your thoughts, tranquilize your thoughts more quicker, or the grasping. And then when the grasping is quelled, then when any kind of cravings arise, by that time they would have been pretty much weakened all along. And then also your mindfulness concentration would have also improved, especially with the attainment of jhanas and so on. Then it's very easy to attain stream entry in those other levels. Or maybe not very easy, but anyway, it's easier. It's what's a requisite for then attaining those the path and fruits that actually destroy and uproot the roots of the craving. So that's how the whole practice of Dhamma is centers around the paticca samuppada, and how especially those particular links are directly related, and the importance of those and how they interaction. So that's what I wanted to basically explain in this talk, and that's why I was trying to get you to pay more attention to the intentions, because the level of intention is where your thoughts are arising from. But it's normally because we don't really see the initial arising of thought, that they kind of come up through the nervous system and gain strength as they're coming up through the nervous system. The memory is making all kinds of connections and so on, and that power is getting stronger, and it takes us away. We get lost in the thought because our attention isn't at that deeper level of directly observing the initial urges of the mind. And that also, there's a little sort of analogy that is like to give this, like the analogy of a thief. Let's say you are sitting on your television watching some program, And you're getting caught up in the program, whether it's a sporting match with some hot, steamy scene or whatever, cowboys and Indians. You know, you're getting caught up in it. So you're distracted. You're not centered in the body. And a car pulls up in front of your house, and the dog starts barking. But because you're distracted, you don't really pay much attention to that. Nothing comes into your mind. Or first the car pulls up, and the person gets out and starts walking toward the house, and the dog starts barking. You miss both of those because you're distracted watching the television. And it could mean you're also kind of half asleep. And then the person climbs over the back fence and makes some noise, you know, rattling some trash cans. Then you don't hear that either. And then he gets over the back fence and he starts jimmying your window and pry it up. You don't hear that. He comes into the house, you know, steals all your silverware or whatever, and then goes out and you didn't even know because you were totally distracted. But then let's say you're a meditator, or you meditate, you have good awareness, you still watch the TV, but you would be watching it with some part of your awareness still grounded and not totally lost into the TV, the action. So, you know, it'd still be, because it comes with training. And so you still have a little bit of reserved mindfulness there, not totally lost in that. And so when you hear a car drive up, you'd probably hear that. Oh, that sounds like a car driving. Oh, I wasn't expecting to be going to. And then you might say, well, never mind. Maybe you got the wrong answer. But then, you know, you hear his car door slam. It's still maybe okay. And then the dog starts barking. And you say, what? That dog really bark. Anybody I know, kind of friendly chat. You know? And so you start to kind of get a little bit alerted. And you kind of stand up. And then you hear them climbing over the back fence. My friends wouldn't climb over the back fence. So then you go on to the back kitchen. And you're standing by the window. And this guy is opening the window, and coming in the window, and you put a bag over his head. You call the cops. So that, in a way, is how our, in our meditation, what we're cultivating in the meditation. You know, to have that alertness when the first sign of discomfort arises, it's like an early warning signal. It alerts us that something's happening. And then when that initial thought or desire arises, we catch it when it's still kind of in its weak stage. And we can, even just applying the mindfulness, discomfort, or you know, thinking might be enough just to make it go away, or you know, you pay attention to something else. And or if it starts increasing, you can apply these other things to it, so that you prevent it from going on from craving to grasping. Anyway, I think that may be enough for this talk. And for those who are here on the retreat, if you have any questions about any of that, you can write those any questions down for tonight's discussion. And so we will try to apply this in the next meditation period. Sadhu,
Sadhu, sadhu.